Hello everyone. Okay, so they changed the water in our fish tank and we fish never knew it. I'm going to continue with what I have started with the Illuminati, Freemasonry. And in the last video, which I will put at the end there, we talked about the history. Yes, how it all started, you remember. And I told you that I have something here coming up. I don't know what it is. Okay, let me get rid of it. Okay, so in the... I told you at the very beginning that it was probably going to be about 3 or 4 videos. And I think it's going to be 4. So this is going to be the second. We talked about the history, and today I'm going to talk a little bit, bring us to the present in terms of cultural terms. I was going to do this one was going to be, I was preparing the one on a different branch of Freemasonry, which is the Spiritism, spiritualism, all that, okay, which was so famous and so in fashion in the 19th century. They got together with the Theosophical Society, brought about Hindu and Buddhist elements. Then after the First World War, it went out of fashion, but it came back again in the 60s with the New Age. You remember all the Eastern philosophies and the gurus and so on. And it hasn't disappeared. It is there in a new form. And I would have to bring Madame Blavatsky, who was so famous. But all that, I'm going to do it in the next video because I need to talk about what I'm talking to talk about today. I think is better if I do it now. And so the third video will be on that Spiritism and that New Age philosophy. Because all that is part of breaking down the old Europe, the Christian Europe, yeah. And in the last one, I'm going to bring it more to geopolitics. And I'm going to give you, not the geopolitics happening today, that you can all see it, but I'm going to give you the examples of how they intervened, or should I say interfered, but intervened in the geopolitical of countries. We saw in the first one about the active role that they had in the French Revolution. I'm not going to talk about the French Revolution, we all know that, but I'm going to give you 3 examples. One is the issue of the Habsburg dynasty. The other one is I'm going to show you how they interfered in one particular Catholic country, and then I'm going to talk about today a little bit more. So that will be the 4th one. This is as an introduction to what you might expect. So I'm going to talk about cultural issues now. So I titled it They Changed the Water in the Fish Tank and the Fish Never Knew It. Just to recap a little bit, so we had a Christian Europe not long ago, and we woke up one day to find out that, goodness, our religion was gone, our culture was gone, our traditions were gone. Almost our country was gone as we knew it, in any case. The world suddenly became, we thought it was suddenly, but it had been gestating there for a long time, since the 16th century really, but certainly since the 18th century, You remember that it was officially started, Freemasonry, with the Anderson Constitutions in 1717. It was alive before, but that is the official date. So we have a sort of a relativist, secularist, syncretic society. That is to say, a Masonic society. Anyway, so one of the things, you remember I told you that they took the word Mason or Freemason from the old guilds, which I explained to you were thoroughly Christian, okay? And they had their own constitutions and so on. But in 1719, 2 years after officially the Freemasonry was formed, in England, John Theophilus de Saguleurs, they carried out a ritual of burning those old books from the guild, those constitutions, the regulations that they had, and they did that on the day of St. John the Baptist. All this is important. On the 24th of June, the anniversary of the founding of Freemasonry. Why did they burn those old books? Well, it's a ritual, and we know that ritual is important to signal that they were breaking from the medieval Freemasonry that was thoroughly Catholic and Christian, to erase, first of all traces of Catholicism. This is going to be important. I don't want you to feel that I am obsessed with it. It's just a Catholic thing. It's just that it started like that, against Catholicism, and then Christianity, and then, yes, so it started with being very, very anti-Catholic, to erase all traces of Catholicism. They do not manage to eliminate all the rituals, all the regulations. Some were preserved. In the Middle Ages, all Masons were professional. As I told you in the last video, they were they would only admit the bricklayers and the builders, and then the architects and so on. The only person who was not a Mason then was the chaplain. But then in England they started admitting other people. The Prince of Wales was one. But towards the 1600s, they had already been admitted members. They had already begun to invite other professionals, lawyers, doctors, professors, philosophers, who brought with them already a non-Christian philosophy. Okay, various objectives here. At the beginning, to close the door to Catholics in that England where they had just brought a Protestant dynasty, to get rid of the Stuarts, the last ones who wanted to restore Catholicism. That was one of the causes. The secret that they kept would be to ensure at the beginning that Catholics would never have any weight in the public life of England. Then Christian, yes, yes, there was the architect of the universe, as I said many times, but at the beginning was against Catholicism. The laws, just to give you an idea of the ambience of the time, the laws against persecution of Catholics were very much present at the time, with the death penalty in many cases. In London, you can still do a journey on a trip, seeing all the houses they're called the priests' closets, where the people hid their priests in case the police, the guards came. So this is the historical context in which Freemasonry was born in England, the 18th century. The persecution had been much harsher in the previous centuries, but in the 18th century is still there to a very large extent. But when you examine those constitutions, the Anderson constitutions of 1717, you begin to see that Freemasonry is no longer compatible really with Christian religion, with the Christian religion. Let me look a little bit first at the historical part. Just by reading those constitutions, they mention the Old Testament, yes, continuously, but they manipulate it as they wish. They change the people of the Old Testament with, they reckon that the Freemasonry was already there in some form. Moses, they explain, is the chief of the Masonic peoples. In terms of, and he has the secret, these gnosis, basically this illumination, the what the initiates receive, this secret knowledge. So that Moses is actually the depository of a millenniarist, so to say, occult knowledge, secret, gnosis. Okay, so that manipulation of the Old Testament is really unacceptable to any Christian. Plus they had the occult superior knowledge only for them, which is really very much an anti-New Testament, is anti-gospel. Jesus Christ is not mentioned at all. If they were indeed Christians, as they claim, and many of them were, Protestants really, they didn't mention Christ at all. The manipulation of the Old Testament is rather terrible, actually. So, that thing that we have something in common, what they claim, because their founders were Protestants, many of them in the clergy, that there is something in common is nonsense, really. It's manipulation. It's actually the worst, the most feeble case of ecumenism. For it is clear to see, and how they developed, that they are actually enemies of Christianity. There have been English authors, especially two English authors actually. One is Walton, Hannan, and Stephen Knight, that show that in the 20th century, Masonry rituals have nothing to do with Christianity. In fact, that they're openly anti-Christian. I will give the names that I mentioned, or the books, I will write them down in the description box. And that they claim that there have been a complete change, even in the Anglican Church. Hannan, William Walton Thomson Hannan, born in 1912 and died in 1966, was originally an English priest from Forest Row in Sussex. Originally an Anglican priest, he later became a Roman Catholic, and he was the author of the controversial book Darkness Visible, which is about the Freemasons. In January 1951, Hannan wrote an article entitled "Should a Christian be a Freemason?" in Theology, a magazine which produced by the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. This was very controversial, as both the King and Geoffrey Fisher, who was then the Archbishop of Canterbury, were both Freemasons, as were many Anglican clerics. The Church of England Assembly discussed the subject in June 1951, although there was no conclusion. Darkness Visible was published in 1952, and he later published Christian by Degrees. I keep saying grades, I don't grades, degrees. Then he left for Canada and became a Catholic priest. He earned his MA from the University of Edinburgh in 1934, and he died in Montreal in 1966. The other one, I won't go into great detail, Stephen Knight, he wrote The Brotherhood, The Secret World of the Freemason. It's about rituals, again, explaining that they're not compatible with Christianity. Okay, so the objectives. First, to begin with, to combat Catholicism so that it never takes hold in England again. But later, together with many Calvinists, became eventually, and others, became what it is today. Then it would go on, it would pass to Europe. And there, because in those countries, mainly Catholic countries, the approach had to be different. So they are active very much against the religion of those countries. So, of course, they have to maintain a certain secrecy. The objective was Gnosticism, social engineering, anti-Christian, not just anti-Catholic now, to change society radically. And two main points, there are many, but two that are very, very clear. The family, to deconstruct, to desacralized society, family, to make the family something that never was, and also control of education. That is one of the many points, but two of them that are going to change society. For a long time, they would dress as laicists or secularists. They would wear those clothes to appear neutral. And so there was a separation of church and state, etc., no problem. But the thing is that many popes all the time, hundreds of times as a matter of fact, kept saying that behind all that, what was going on, that at the end of it all was to eradicate religion, eradicate Christianity, eradicate especially Catholicism. In other words, the creation of a new society, a new man. And this actually they recognize themselves more and more, practically openly now. Change the family, tolerance, freedom, free thinking, all positive messages. Tolerance, freedom, solidarity. But you're going to see that many times they are veiled excuses. They're selling something that is not ultimately, when you buy it, you see that is not what they were selling. It's another deception of social engineering that intensified in the 19th and the 20th century. I'm going to talk just for a minute about the popes, because they were, from the 19th century, they were continuously saying things. I mean, there are hundreds of these epistles going against this movement. Very rapidly, all of them. First Clement the 12th in 1730, 1751, all the popes of the 19th century, and also in the 20th. Because they saw that the direction was to go towards creating a global religion. All these religions, different regions, different everything, to combine into one global religion. I spoke about that in the previous video. Yes, to just take the very, very general and do away with the specific. Well, the specific in Christianity is Jesus Christ. You do away with that, you're left with something. All right, but that was the movement, a global religion. And especially, as I said before, against the Catholic Church, because if you enter into relativism, the Catholic Church is the one that has dogmas, so you cannot have dogmas in relativism, moral relativism. So Jesus Christ became a leader, any new leader, a superior being perhaps of some sort. But it was the architect of the universe. And to the architect of the universe, the Anderson constitutions are the ones, he's the one that they invoke in all the documents written. There is no revelation of any kind, no clear message about God and dogmas. Revelation is rejected. So we end up with a deism, a supreme being, okay? And this is the thing, that you get there through reason, but reason alone. The reason of the human mind. No revelation, nothing else. There is within certain obediences one that is Luciferian. They make a difference between Lucifer and Satan. Yeah, Lucifer is a positive character. He is the bearer of light that brings to the human being reason. Yeah, so that is why we have to worship him, because you see in the Garden of Eden, God actually prohibited that. Okay, don't touch this tree. Okay, so I think I have it written down, so I'll follow my notes. Albert Pike in the United States in the 19th century, he was in the grade or the degree 33, so the highest of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. He actually wrote hymns to Lucifer, the Prince of Dawn, the bearer of light, Gnostic. Yeah, some in the highest grades, not in the lower ones, they don't know this at the very beginning. But in the higher grades, you see the serpent, Lucifer, was an ally of man, because what he brings to man is knowledge, and so makes man the center of creation. He can eat of various trees. Everything is created for him, except the one about good and evil. In other words, it is not God told our first parents, it is not up to you to determine what is right and what is wrong. Don't eat of that one, okay? It is only for God to determine what is right and what is wrong. The serpent, instead, the tempter, brings knowledge. So it is an ally. And so he is with us. God is against us, they say, because he banished us all from paradise. So it was the serpent, it was Lucifer who actually made it possible for us to get that knowledge that God only wanted to keep for himself. And this is recognized as Lucifer, who brings light to us. Some obediences differ from others. There is one called, for example, human right. And there is a famous French former Mason who wrote 2 books about his experiences at great cost to himself. And he said, he was asked, well, when do you, because we know that this kind of knowledge, you only get it as you ascend in that esoteric secret knowledge. So he was asked, when did you actually realize that you would end up kind of worshipping Lucifer? And he thought about it for a little while, and then he said, in my obedience, the human right, I think the first. Really, that early? He said, coming to think about it, yes, I thought it was a little bit weird at the time, so I asked my master, and he said, don't worry, this is just totally symbolic. It's just something we do once a year, but that's all. And so then he would, anyway, his 2 books are very, very interesting. I'll see if I can get the title and write it, put it in the description box. He actually, one of the books is I was worshipping Lucifer and I didn't know it, something like that. Anyway, okay. But I talked in the last video about certain rituals, okay? In the Scottish, the ancient and accepted Scottish rite in grade 29, they have to step on a crucifix, as I said, and to actually worship Baphomet, which is another name for the same spirit, the devil's incarnation. And they say, may the light of Baphomet reign. This is in some of the more Luciferian obediences. Albert Pike, the one that wrote the hymns, he said that he actually confirmed this ritual. And it is not that at grade 29, when you are actually to worship Baphomet, that you don't know what you're doing. You can no longer claim that you're not really aware of what you're doing. You are. The popes in the 19th century saw it as a satanic sect. And they wrote, it was evident to them, and they wrote about it. And if it is satanic in the sense that if you are to worship Baphomet, and you have to be aware of what you're doing, having reached that stage, to me, then that is very clear what you are. I don't think all other explanations are irrelevant. This is the key, the origin of their beliefs and rituals. It is not something that is veiled or, secret anymore. They do make some efforts for us to see them as benefactors of humanity, that they are in fact actually the origin of democracy, the order, as they say, that brought individual rights to the world, that they are enabling democracy and liberty and so on. They are very much involved in politics, as you know, obviously. President Hollande of France, just before leaving the presidency, he was a Mason, he went to his lodge, the Grand Orient French, to thank them officially for all they had contributed to the building of the Republic. We're talking about France, we're talking about a country very much attacked by Freemasonry and the secularism that they encouraged. It was a condemnation of Pius X that speaks directly about how religion in France was being subverted, this 19th century, by Freemasonry. So much so until they managed to eradicate religion completely from the public scene. Many writings, the oldest ones from the 18th century, point especially to two main points: that they are a danger to the state and a danger to the salvation of souls. At that time, the Freemasons were excommunicated, even those who would cooperate with them. In the 19th century, the writings are much more detailed, perhaps because they have been a more detailed study of their activities. The French Revolution over by then, which had left an inheritance that they claim is an inheritance of freedoms. And in the 19th century, we have all the popes, but especially Leo XIII. The human race, since it's separated from God by sin, is divided into two bands, he said, into two sections, which are diverse and adverse. One on the side of Jesus Christ, fighting for truth and virtue, the other fighting against all that is truth and virtue, the band of Satan, which he associated with this movement. And this explains very clearly now, he goes on to explain very clearly what is in fact social engineering. The attacks on family and education. One side, nothing religious, nothing Christian, a corruption of customs and traditions. This is the Pope speaking. A corruption of customs and traditions that come from them. He tells us to take their masks off, because they always portray themselves as being the benefactors of humanity, the philanthropic fighters for freedom, etc. But behind it all, there is something very different. And he actually goes on to say that we must get the young out of their heinous smell. I mean, they were that... I don't think we can perhaps write it in such an straightforward way nowadays, but those were the words. Those were the ways they wrote about it. And he finishes saying that a great assault requires a great defense. The battle is clear. This was in 1884. And those who resist or stand in their way, well, there have been quite a few genocides. True genocides, actually, against those who resisted them. Yes, the French Revolution, but remember La Vendée. I did a video on all the martyrs of La Vendée a year ago. But in other cities too, in Lyon, for example, the death penalty if you openly defended the church. You could also be accused of the crime of fanaticism, I guess equivalent to hate crime today. But of course, yes, some people have been taken to prison for hate crimes, yeah. Not the death penalty, though. But there is a case of the famous widow in Lyon, who was the mother of a Paris priest, the widow Aubin, condemned to death for being a fanatic, because she had hidden priests in her home. And her daughters were also taken to prison because they were condemned also of fanaticism for wearing religious symbols. An author, Biggery, in Christianity and Revolution, he says that they were condemned to death because when they were coming to search their house, in another case, or is it the same case? No, I think it's the same, the widow. Because when they came to search the house, they found a special kind of bread, and they estimated that a mass had been celebrated there. In any case, the revolution is theirs, but at the end they end up killing each other, because the final battle was between different sections of the revolutionaries themselves. As they magnify nice words, they hide these religious, certainly when speaking of the French Revolution, nice words, equality, liberty, but they hide this religious persecution, very much present, this Masonic spirit. It was hard, harsh, it was bloody, but it is not the only example. And all those wars in Catholic countries during the 19th century, they are fanning the flames. I think that whenever you see chaos, major changes, regime changes, all these kind of thing, I think they're not very far away. Social engineering. Well, engineering is to execute a plan which has already been predetermined. In other words, to put it into practice. And in this case is to influence society, changing it, inverting it from its roots. And an anti-Christian engineering is one that Freemasonry has always fostered. Many, but education and family, to name but a few. In Protestant countries, secular education to ensure that future generations will have practically absolute ignorance of religion. To a certain extent, it has happened. Social engineering in Catholic countries, where the majority of the institutions were Catholic, well, to do away, dismantling all Catholic schools. That's social engineering. In other words, God is to be completely silenced. In the case of Spain, they prefer to close all the schools during the Republic, rather than to have them continue with the religious that were teaching there. That's social engineering. Later it will come also from international organizations and political parties. Engineering. In the United Nations, the number of Masons is very, very high. In the 70s and 80s already, 60% of functionaries there were Freemasons. The agencies of the UN, UNICEF, which deals with children, most involved in politics and anti-natalist policies. What is anti-natalist? Well, someone who believes that it is morally wrong to have children, or that people should be encouraged not to have children. Some antinatalists appeal to negative utilitarianism, they say, which is the moral theory that the only salient aspect of morality is avoiding pain. So they're disguising it, as always, with good words and good objectives to combat poverty, for example, or also with arguments much more sophisticated now to, for example, liberate women from what they call reproductive work or reproductive imposition. I'm not making this up. Carolyn Hannan from Sweden, she was the director of one of these agencies, I forget now which one, but she coined the phrase reproductive imposition, the inversion of natural order. The trying to prevent women to develop or to accept a natural law, you could say, is a natural vocation. In the summits of the UN, for example, the ones in Beijing and in Cairo that were convened in the 1990s, they dealt specifically, this is the 1990s, they dealt specifically with two subjects: the issue of population and of women. Was their aim positive for the overall good of mankind? The debates were not officially published, but what they were debating, in fact, was how to change the family model in the 90s. And there are documents, overwhelming they are, that talk about how to change the family unit to a more desired family model, urging governments even to use all means at their disposal to put it out there, to promote it out there, promote it through, at the time, TV programs and radio shows, the aim to change the family model. This is not just social engineering, this is brainwashing, because it's no longer influencing directly the family, but changing it to another different desired family model, which has already happened, as you can see. Is to change the pattern, the model is to change. To change that is to change the wishes and the aspirations and the vocation of the family unit, so that the true family is eventually rejected. So we give the name family now to any other type of human association, united by several and different and diverse motives, emotional, economic, sexual, whatever interest. And now to this old family unit, we attach the surname traditional, as if it was a subset. The traditional family is becoming outdated. John Paul II was fighting this. He saw it clearly. He called it the culture of death. I don't know if you remember all the way back. He saw behind all that, and he saw that it was a clear violation of true human rights. He said that very clearly. And so anti-natalist, abortion, but it's not even just about defending a certain morality, but rather the fundamental rights of man, they said. So then they had to create a new series of new fundamental rights. They had to be invented. And so now we have two more fundamental human rights, sexual and reproductive rights. From the right to choose, the language was carefully chosen. Because if it is granted this freedom to choose, it seems that they are giving you true freedom. I choose. I choose everything, even life and death. I choose to give life or not to give life. I choose to suppress it or to reject life that is on the way, or terminal life. I choose. But that right to choose is a false fundamental right. It's a false natural law right. It does not exist in natural law, but of course they had previously been involved in this process already of social engineering, of eradicating natural law anyway. Benedict XVI said that in Germany, natural law had become a peculiarity of the Catholic Church, because outside of the Catholic world, it is not recognized that such thing exists. The first president of UNESCO, Julian Huxley, already in the 1940s, said very clearly, and these are his words, "There is nothing immutable or eternal in ethics." Be careful with these statements, because what he's telling you is that there is no natural law. nor is there a higher authority that demands of us to legislate of politicians to legislate in one given direction. What we have, all we have, is the agreements, policy agreements, the agreements that they themselves reach, the diplomats, the politicians. That's what we have. Nothing more. Goes back to Rousseau. Yeah. And this is what we have from the UN. Clearly. The right to choose. From there, all those new rights, sexual rights, reproductive rights, the rights to fully live out sexuality without restrictions and totally unrelated to procreation. Those are the new rights that have already been extended or are intended to be now extended to minors. A gender ideology is a self-constructive thing. I reject the given, I construct myself, and what I decide, that is what I am. Biology has nothing to do with it, of course. Neither God, of course. It is a rebellion behind which you see emerging the diabolical. That is what diabolical means, rebellion against God. That is what social engineering is ending up being. In the European Union, same as in the UN. So the circle is closing, and from there, of course, the next step is to introduce sexual education at the most basic levels at primary schools to give children what they want to give them, which is that vision of sexuality as a general right of the human being that has nothing to do with reproduction. Indeed, going back, women have to be freed from that which is a burden, an imposition, a reproductive imposition that biology put there and from which she has to be freed. In other words, freed from herself. Political parties have adopted this, some earlier, some later, finally all of them. The dictatorship of relativism. Because obviously, as John Paul II said, a democracy without values easily converts to a covert totalitarianism, and from covert to overt, visible, as history shows. This is what Benedict XVI called the tyranny of relativism, just before becoming Pope. I suppose they didn't like him very much. He said, "He who adheres to the truth is no longer, in our world now, he who adheres to the truth is no longer regarded as reliable from a democratic point of view, because now it has become generally accepted that the right attitude or belief of a democrat is relativistic skepticism." That's what he said. So what happened? No political party now, whether voters wish it or not, no political party goes into battle for these principles, because they have managed to establish, the Freemasonry, they have managed to establish, and this comes in sometimes in pyramidal, from international organizations, agreements, that these must be carried out. Therefore, a politician from whatever party, if he opposes these policies, his career is over. So no one can afford to defend actually fundamental natural law rights. Not even to defend life itself. And here, this is not even a question of faith, it's a question of reason. If we do not defend life itself, what exactly are you defending at the end of it all? What possible rights can I possibly have if we don't even have the right to live? It's not only about abortion, this. That was the beginning. Now is the old. Who next? I don't want to dwell into politics too much, but I see at the moment a leader of a country in Eastern Europe who has practically, the way I see it, rented out his country and his people so that another country or a group of countries may wage war against a third country. That's the way I see it. He has rented out his country and his people. So who next? Well, anybody. But more on geopolitics in, the next video. But coming back, what can we hold on to if we don't have the right to live? We've come to the point when even this, that should need no explanation, even this has to be explained. And all this was clearly seen in the 90s when the world changed, in those summits in Cairo and Beijing. Now the Freemasonry and laws against life, these anti-natalists, they have been there all along for a long time. The law of abortion in France, for example, Simon Veil's law, Pierre Simon, a Mason in the higher grades, published the book. And he actually had the gall to entitle it Life Above All, or Life First. Yeah? And you think, well, I get this book, you imagine that it's going to be pro-life, right? No. Remember always the manipulation of language. He says, these are his words, to defend life implies to have the right to reject it. So, an abnormal child without cure, let him die. So, you see, what we have is that instead of a good life, a life that is good, this becomes something like the good life to enjoy. If you cannot enjoy the good life, then it is terrifying to read what a French Mason, a doctor of the French Orient, says on life. He says the concept of human life that comes from Greek philosophy or Western thought is that life is but matter to be worked on. Matter to be worked on. In other words, takes away any transcendental meaning. He boasted of it. He wrote it. He wrote this, that law in France, the Simon Veil law on abortion, he wrote this, a victory of Freemasonry over Judeo-Christian thought. And he wrote that law, the actual text, had been drafted in his lodge. And he told about it and wrote about it. Another author, Maurice, Caillet, in his book, I Was a Mason. He was a doctor, left, had done abortions, had done sterilizations previous to that. And sterilization, even in the 60s, even in France, was seen at the time as an act of self-mutilation, punishable at the time. Mutilation, sorry. Self-mutilation, yeah? And that was in the 60s. Okay, so you may agree or disagree on this point, but my point, what I'm trying to say, is that this was in the 60s, but suddenly it was legal. And we read that the Freemasons were discussing it in their lodges. And when going to Parliament, all Freemasons in Parliament, from whatever party, voted as one sole person in favor. So if you're wondering about uniparty, the uniparty, okay, so you may differ about this, about that, but the main thing and the main objective, you vote the same. Should be different according to parties, according to the electorate, nothing to do with that. Because if you think that they're only representing the electorate, you're missing a bit of that puzzle. The Masons, the Freemasonry bit, okay? And that is what is important, because there is an external obedience that takes preference over your constituents. But this is far from democratic, yes, but because that other obedience, that external obedience, comes first, before your duty to represent your constituency, who may not even know that you have this other obedience that you have to obey. And there you are, your representative, representing citizens who are maybe, for the most part, unaware of that situation. Probably they do not share your Masonic ideals. But that politician is really secretly betraying them. It's not democratic at all. He's obeying the assignment given to him by his lodge. Actually, believe it or not, England, who is the cradle of Freemasonry, denounced this. Amazing. They denounced it. The Labour government in 1985, the Labour Party, denounced this, that the weight of Freemasonry, they said, was so powerful in European institutions, because they said it restricted the careers of those who were not Freemasons. And they pointed out to all these meteoric careers, suddenly, almost from nowhere, they appear practically at the top. How? With no other backing. That is not transparent. They denounced it. And so let's talk a little bit about front organizations. Very effective. We have, of course, the Fabian Society in England. a round table also of Freemasons and non-Masons. And this, when you put them together, both of them, it might have a higher efficacy than the actual lodges themselves, because they're open in the field and they can cooperate with people who are non-Masons, or with people who, for whatever reason, are not willing to join, but do accept the overall strategy. They are led by Masons, but the ones who follow may be or may not be. After World War I, after the Treaty of Versailles, and delegations of countries got together, the countries affected by the war came together to put an end to this situation, and of course the Freemasonry was there. An assistant to President Wilson, Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was always a man in the shadows. Some people saw him as a shadow president, enormous weight in American politics. He was a Mason, and actually a Mason of Luciferian obedience, the most fierce. And in Versailles, founded there a front organization with much future actually ahead of it, the CFR, the Council of Foreign Relations. And he did it in a meeting suddenly with representatives from the American and English delegations. But not all the round table were. The fact of having a front organization is, as I said, that many are not. And so it can be used it can serve as a cover, a normal organization, precisely because many of them are not Masons. Half, yes. But this organization is an organization that even today most Americans do not know that it exists. It's there, the headquarters in Park Avenue. Their website does not give much information. To improve knowledge of the world in the US, considered to be an isolationist country, so their objectives are to impart knowledge of the world to Americans who don't know much about other countries in the world. The intention of the words are always good. In other words, and the intention that Americans may know the world in which they live. Okay. But then it starts rolling. And then there is also the Royal Institute, the English equivalent to the Council of Foreign Relations, and through which pass all those who aspire to have a relevant position in American or English politics. In the political parties, generally, two parties, both candidates, for the most part, have belonged to the CFR first. Be they Masons or not, that is not the point. The point is the ideology is. Okay. Key moments in their history from these front organizations, from other different fronts, but the aims are the same. The ideology is the same. For example, one famous one now, for some reason, is the Club Bilderberg. That started in the 50s with people from the Council of Foreign Relations involved in its founding. It started, we are told, by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, and took the name from the hotel at Oosterbeek in the Netherlands, where they met. And it is to promote understanding between Europe and the US. Okay. What is it? A debate forum? It is held annually in concentric circles. The central core are Masons. The externals, those invited, could or could not be. They don't have to be. Yes and no. The externals are invited perhaps once, perhaps more than once, but they have never initiated, and may not, some of them may not know in depth the overall policies of Bilderberg. They are nevertheless required to keep secret what they hear, so we don't know what is discussed. There are more and more invitees in the last few years. The invitation comes with a minimum of time. They don't give you a long time there. Each year in a different country, with truly amazing security, and keeps in secret what happens there. But the advisory committee, the central one, is Freemasons. Their influence, well, international economy, the price of oil, which has, and things that, where the national interests of countries may come very much second to their own interest, the interest of the club. Political issues, well, let's say, let's go back the Balkans War. The club took decisions that affected, in reality, what should be made by governments, whether or not to enter the war. So, a club of distinguished members, yes, not democratic at all, persons there deciding over wars affecting millions of people. Another front is the Trilateral Commission. It is Freemason and to do with globalism, the famous Masonic globalism, which they say they reject that. They say that they radically deny it in public. Okay, so the objective to obtain the maximum, the way I see it, to obtain the maximum concentration of power in the minimum number of hands possible. A global government whose model, its structure of government anyway, could be, at the moment they're using the United States, but it could be the UN proper, which has already got an executive committee, which would be, let's say, the government, or play the role of a government, an assembly, which would be the equivalent of a legislative body. There are already there international tribunals. They already is sort of some kind of a model of a government setup. The European Union is another model. So who is this Trilateral Commission? The Trilateral opened actually to Japan in the 70s. They sought to control the three great centers of power, America, Europe, and the opening to the East through Japan. Objective? One government, or perhaps, no, more realistically, perhaps 3 or 5 at the time, depending on one per continent, but ultimately to eliminate national sovereignty, taking sovereignty away. Now, who wins here? The international organizations, financed greatly by them, multinational foundations, the World Bank, corporations, main corporations, all the important ones, certainly, especially those with headquarters in the US. Financing, yes, because the Rockefeller family always distinguished for financing these front organizations. It actually has its own proper lodge, with the family name, the Grand Rockefeller Lodge. They are Luciferians, and they only accept Masons to them of those of the highest grades that were already higher grades before they come into their lodge. And that contributed a lot to, organization of capital, and they can count with the heavyweights in politics. David Rockefeller, who died not long ago, Henry Kissinger, who has been in all the creation of all the front organizations with the Freemasonry. Behind the stage, there is a world where decisions are taken without citizens having any idea that this other world exists. And if you do talk about it, immediately, the level of conspiracy, the label of conspiracy. Though it is becoming more and more difficult, because we know a little, but we know a little more than what we used to. But it is a minimal part of how they function. We just see at the moment the fruit of their endeavors, and that sometimes only. Okay, I'm going to leave it here for today, and I will be pleased to share with you all about Madame Blavatsky tomorrow, and all the conjuring and all that is going to be a little bit more fun. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.